Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We see many familiar faces and some new faces too, so it's great to see everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the music this morning, and as Jane asked, we are going to answer that question, and the answer in the chat is correct. It is music that was performed by Vanessa Ferrero. She's a Colombian British artist who actually did a set of music for a film that you're going to be seeing later this morning. So, as you all know, at Alight, we are humanitarians, and we believe that there is simple human justice in the chance to create a life. So when we find people displaced from their homes, we help them with their basic needs, of course, but that's not living. That is living, it is not a life. A life is one that is filled with joy, dignity, connection, purpose, and that's what we aim to build. And that's actually why we're here this morning. Our Workshare series is a chance to give you all an inside look at the amazing work that Alight partners and staff are co-designing with displaced people around the world. And today you're going to hear and see one of our newest initiatives on the US-Mexico border known as I want to start this morning by giving a quick shout out and a huge thank you to 4 people who are integral to today. 2 are our partners who you'll hear from today, Sister Irene O'Neill and Ron RAEL. And I also want to thank Kara Levin's Carla Holt, who will actually be moderating our discussion today. And finally, we have an anonymous sponsor of this session who's donating $20 to this initiative for each and every person Zooming with us today. So a huge shout out and thank you to the 4 of you. As many of you know, there is a humanitarian crisis at the US-Mexico border. And throughout the Americas, people have fled violence, persecution, lack of opportunity at home, in a goal to build a better life for their kids and for themselves. This crisis is extremely complicated. It's become overly politicized, as we all know. But when we look past that and into the faces of the children, women, men caught in the middle of it all, one thing is clear. There are real human beings and they are in need of help. And that's why Alight is at the border. We're partnering with Catholic sisters who are running migrant shelters on the border, mother and son duos who are providing safe haven for at-risk LGBTQI migrants. We're working with Burners Without Borders, architects, creatives, and visionaries who are trying to meet the needs of these families with humanity and work together to help people feel whole again and ready to face their future. So without further ado, I actually want to introduce 2 of these partners. So Sister Irene O'Neill, who many of you know and are inspired by like us, is the director of Sister Rising Worldwide, based in St. Paul, Minnesota. She works courageously to tackle some of the world's most difficult issues in fighting against injustice. And if there's one thing you need to know about Irene, she has a big vision. Big is an understatement. And that vision is to unite and amplify the work of the 700,000 Catholic nuns around the world. Irene has been teaming up with Alight for several years to unite sisters and fight against human trafficking. It started in El Salvador and it's now at the US-Mexico border. Our second partner you're going to hear from is Professor Ron RAEL. He actually holds the Ava Lee Memorial Chair in Architecture and a joint appointment in the Department of Architecture and the Department of Art Practice at UC Berkeley. He's the founder of the award-winning design practice, Ron RAEL Fratello. He's a design activist, author, and thought leader within topics of additive manufacturing and earthen architecture. His work has been published widely, including by the New York Times, Wired, and it is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He's teamed up with Alight for the first time on this initiative. So we're going to just do a short warm-up questions for Ron and Sister Irene. So the first one, so I would normally ask our featured guests a warm-up question or 2. So that's where we are at right now. Ron, the first one is to you. And what we want to know is what surprised you most about working with nuns?
Well, thanks, Jeremy, and hi, everyone. You know, I guess I wouldn't say that there was nothing surprising about working with nuns in particular. I think maybe what I learned was, and what I gained was an enormous amount of respect I have for their courage and dedication to improving the lives of people who have undergone such hardship on journeys fleeing violence, poverty, and oppression. And so it's I mean, maybe I didn't realize the incredible impact they're having on people's lives in the borderlands, and so that's what I think maybe I learned from that experience.
That's awesome. It's actually something that we've heard from a lot of people and many of us on the Alight staff as well about actually just being able to see the work that they're doing because they're so heads down just doing the day-to-day work. So that's awesome. Sister Irene, your turn. What surprised you about working with Ron?
I think the greatest surprise was really a thrill to see that Ron's work is not something that you just hang on the wall and you enjoy, you know, when you see it, but his work is alive. And I really felt like what he's doing is leveraging through his art really a peaceful, loving society. And that's where his mind goes. How can I create something that will create a peaceful, loving society? And it's like his art, rather than hanging on the wall, it's living inside my heart and other people's hearts as you take it with you. So I've just been thrilled to see what he does and how he thinks and really transform society through his art.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you know, his work does come alive, and actually we're really lucky that we're going to actually be able to share that with everyone on the call today about how his work really does come alive. And so I'm going to just do a short introduction of a documentary short film that we're about to see. It's a film about a shelter in Nogales, which is a border city, and it's providing haven for hundreds of migrants who have journeyed across the Americas, but with a common dream of building a better life for themselves and for their children. Alight and our partners worked with the founder of the shelter, Sister Lika, to transform the shelter and create a space where families could gather, cook, and eat together. Kids could be kids, adults could breathe, and they could plan for their future. It's called Pedacito de la Tierra, or a little piece of home. So grab your coffee or tea. The film is about 10 minutes long. And it is beautiful and it's amazing, and we are really excited to bring it to you today. So I will cue it up.
Mi padre fue asesinado cuando yo tenía 8 o 9 años. Mi mamá se volvió a casar con el hombre que se casó, fue amenazado por los carteles. Tuvimos que huir de nuestra casa. Ahora que ya soy de edad, esperemos casarnos cuando tengamos un lugar seguro.
Todo eso ahí, abandonado, y tener que ir a otros lugares a empezar de cero. He pasado por muchos países, he pasado por 5 fronteras.
Pues ahorita estamos esperando una solicitud de asilo para poder entrar a los Estados Unidos.
Tengo 8 años, ya tengo un año aquí.
Y todo por culpa de gente mala que en nuestro propio país tenemos.
Mi vida estuvo en peligro, está en peligro, pues hasta el día de hoy yo no puedo regresar a mi país.
Fue una trayectoria muy fea, muy fea, muy fea. Cuando Lika se acercó a nosotras y la conocimos, o sea, cambió todo.
Buenos días. Van a hacer sorpresa para los niños. Van a hacer sorpresa. Me dicen madre, me dicen Lika por mi nombre, hasta abuelita resulté. Entonces, crear el espacio, coordinarlo y que esto funcione. Este espacio es como la espera y como una preparación, yo digo también, de serenidad y paz para cruzar a Estados Unidos. Su proceso de asilo inicia aquí, en este espacio. Doctora,
over the last 4 years, we've had such a huge surge of migrants with nowhere to go, nowhere to be safe, nowhere to be cared for. Medical, food, clothing, shelter, warmth, hot water, that's all here. At this time, we have over 200 people.
Aquí vienen unos maestros que nos dan clases.
Pues yo espero para mi hijo un mejor futuro, que estudie, que sea alguien en la vida y que haga algo en la vida.
He estado apoyando, pues ahorita es Alight. Alight es quien nos ha creído en nosotros y ha hecho posible también un sueño de alegría y felicidad, porque a través de ellos tenemos transformado espacios. Hay un grupo de abogadas, les dan a conocer cuáles son sus derechos, les dan a conocer todo el proceso de asilo.
Aquí que somos unidos, nos ayudamos mutuamente. ¿Cómo nos ayudan aquí a prepararnos? Manteniéndonos una estabilidad emocional y también física.
Hemos estado en muchos albergues y no ha sido ninguno como este.
Sinceramente, acá en Nogales, más tranquilo.
Gente como Ronald que nos están apoyando muchísimo a construir todo esto, porque nosotros solos no pudiéramos hacerlo.
I had a vision to build hornos along the U.S.-Mexico border to bring people together around food, and I was lucky enough to be invited to do that. And so here we are. I'm coming in to maybe simply be a very small catalyst of someone who wants to make an horno, but there are people here who know how to make hornos much better than me, who cooked on hornos much longer than me. For some, they've never seen an horno. You know, it's a giant pile of mud. The word horno means oven, and everybody has an oven in their house in the United States, and it's just this little metal thing, and they put in some stuff, and they close it down, and there's no ceremony or ritual around it. When I say this is an oven made out of earth, it's made out of the ground right beneath our feet. It's made out of the clay and sand, and we just make it into bricks. And it's not a product that you buy, but it's something that you make, something that anyone can do. And it's a technology that's been around for thousands of years.
¿Qué construimos? Sí. Me encanta. Aquí reconstruimos personas y reconstruimos la humanidad.
Como te digo, soy guatemalteco, ya no soy ningún muchacho jovencito. Acostumbrado a hacer el pan según la costumbre de nuestro pueblo. Tú me dices si se está abriendo para poner más madera, porque ya estamos muy close.
Sí. The horno. We just finished closing it up, and now we're giving it one coat of plaster. Hornos are like magic, right? The moment we built it, all of a sudden there's fire, so people gather around the fire. Suddenly there's food being prepared, and so people are gathering around food. Suddenly there's warmth, people are eating, people are talking. So it's amazing how the horno itself just kind of lit up this space in amazing ways and brought people together around it.
Hi.
My dream is that we can build 100 of these along the border. I think a bigger dream is that how can we share not only food, but these stories across the border. This horno will be here for hundreds of years, and it's now a member of the community. There was a beautiful sign around here. It said something like, "Fronteras nos divide, pero la tierra nos une." Borders divide us, but the earth unites us.
americanos van de aquí. Sí. Cada vez que se va una persona, o sea, como llegan, me dan ganas de llorar. Tengo ganas de llorar. Bueno, también llora de alegría. Yo lloro de alegría también. Sí.
Ahora sí ya estamos listos. Ahora yo sí puedo decir que estoy lista con mi familia para poder emprender ese nuevo viaje.
Ha sido difícil, pero pues gracias a Dios poco a poco vamos viendo la luz al final del túnel.
Que estuvieran de los inmigrantes, que nos den una oportunidad. Muchísimas gracias por tomarse este tiempo para escucharnos.
Cuando esté grande quiero vivir en este albergue porque está bien bonito.
Thank you so much to everyone who brought us that video today. So I'm really excited to introduce an amazing journalist, humanitarian, and our Changemakers Ball Gala MC extraordinaire, Carla Holt. Carla is an anchor and reporter at NBC affiliate Care 11. She's traveled with Alight to refugee settlements in Uganda and Rwanda, and most recently was reporting with us from the border. She's been an incredible host, as I said, of our Gala fundraiser before, and many of you know she tells stories with such depth and empathy. And we are really excited to have her join us today to moderate our discussion with Irene and Ron. Welcome to you, Carla.
Jeremy, thank you so much. And that is so kind of you, so generous. I'm humbled by your very nice words. I want to welcome everyone as well. Thank you for being here today. It's so great to see all of these faces and even the names when you don't want your video on. We love seeing the names as well. It's just fabulous. And we all know we are so honored and just excited to have Irene and Ron with us right now because these are two forceful people. I want to begin by quoting Annie Nolte Henning of Alight, and she says often, we know humanitarians when we see them. And so they saw the Catholic sisters and they knew they could absolutely find an ally with the Catholic sisters, and no one better to support and represent the Catholic sisters and the support and the force that they give communities throughout the world than Sister Irene. So Sister Irene, I want to start with you. You know, we just saw this beautiful video that was just so heart-touching and so compelling about life on the border right now. You have an interesting perspective, really an on-the-ground perspective of what it's like there. Can you speak to really what is it like for families currently on the border? What is the humanitarian situation like? So the big picture, but also what are they struggling with? What is the typical experience for each individual family? Sister Irene.
Yes, hello, everybody. I think that each of us could probably understand what these people might be going through in terms of fear. At some time in our life, we've felt fearful about something. And when you think about how that goes through your whole body, it's can freeze you up, or it can, you know, make you stop, not know what the next thing to do is. These people have fled gang violence, they have, or poverty and persecution. Many of them have a little hope of a future. So they can't go home and they don't really have a clear path forward, but they keep moving anyway, because what else is there to do? Some are there at the border waiting for their asylum to be heard, and others have been denied and they've walked thousands of miles and there they are. and they've been denied and they don't have a plan B. One of the things that the sisters and are particularly worried about the people is that they are very susceptible, vulnerable to sexual violence and trafficking once they're trapped along the border there, and actually all the way up when they're migrating. So there's that constant fear as well. And how do they, can they all fit in the building? Will they be safe? And some really have no shelters. Some are living in squalid conditions. So if you could just try on that word fear, you'd get a real understanding of what's happening inside them.
Sister Irene, I think that sisters, Catholic sisters throughout the world have been so self-sufficient and resourceful, and so perhaps have wanted to go it alone often when faced with a really great challenge. But your organization really seeks to connect Catholic sisters throughout the world and help them to connect with each other so that they can really pool their resources, their strategies, their intelligence, their on-the-ground relationships. What are you hearing from sisters on both sides of the border regarding what they're doing and what they're hearing from families there?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, the first thing that the sisters do when they meet the people along the border on either side is they ask their name. And then they ask, what is your story? Because they want each person to feel like a person still and not just like a migrant, a group of people moving. And so that's the first thing. And one of the reason why that's a big deal is that imagine a lot of people coming and that the sisters have this inclination to say, what is your name? And to remember it. So that, the more people that can know their help with the names is a big deal. They are, then of course, they also are interested in, they need the basic food and clothing and health and safety. That comes, at the same time. And all of these resources are important so that they can, just feel their own human dignity. Often people think that the sisters are funded by the huge Catholic hierarchy, but it doesn't. It doesn't help with the funding of sisters' outreach to people in need. So they have to be incredibly resourceful. And it's one of those things where, like, if I need bricks and you have bricks, I would say, could I have some bricks? So the sisters are out asking, inviting people to share. So they make sure that the lights are on. They want to have everybody to have food in their bellies and a place to sleep. And they just go out and ask for help. Now, on the other side of the border, on the US side of the border, once somebody is allowed to cross, they don't have anything on that side either. So they're looking for shelter and food and clothing and things like bus tickets, because they need to go from point A to B and they need to travel. And one of the things that happens on the bus is that it's freezing cold. And so they need warm clothing and they, so they just keep trying to meet the need as it comes. So it doesn't stop.
It doesn't stop. Well, you mentioned that they just ask direct questions and they say, I need bricks, I'll make this happen. But I just wanted to mention, when you mentioned questions, I want to encourage everyone who's listening right now, if you want to go ahead and add your questions on the chat. Of course, Sister Irene is covering so many important topics right now. If you have a question that what she's saying might be something that you want more information on, just add it into the chat and we'll get to those at the very end. But, the other thing about what you're talking about, Sister Irene, we think about a humanitarian crisis. And I think the first thing we think is not in our country, but of course that's happening here. But the second thing is that it's really not just about perhaps medical care, clean water and food, that at least with regards to your approach, Alight's approach, Ron's approach, it's about something more than that in terms of the needed response. Can you speak to that?
Oh, sure. It's trauma. It's about trauma, but it's also, you want the people to heal. And so when life gets really complicated, all of us want a time to think, just think, and to figure out what's our next steps, or to just stop. But how can you when you have children, a lot of children around you? And so you need to have play areas so that the children can continue their life and that they're kind of held separate from the trauma a little bit if you can help them. So you worry about your kids and you want them to have a play area. You also have gifts. Everybody who comes, again, we talk about them as migrants, but really they're philosophers, they're teachers, they're nurses, they're doctors, they're educators, they're talented people, and they want to give as well. They want to be able to share something, and they want to be able to help. But it takes, first they need spaces where they can heal from the trauma. They need places for the children so that the children can just be children. They need to gather as families. And they need basically really a moment just so they can plan their next steps. So.
Yeah, and you are part of providing that moment. And we are so grateful for the fact that you're recognizing those gifts that they can give to other people, and the fact that we can perhaps reciprocate to a degree, at least at this point too, during this moment of crisis. I want to pivot a little bit here to Ron. Ron is world renowned. And I don't say that without, actual merit, substance behind those words. This is an architect and a designer who is so accomplished. We're so excited that he's participating in this Alight project, A Little Piece of Home. But before I move on to that project, I want to give Ron an opportunity to speak to a recent project that you might have seen, because I saw it. It gave me chills. It might have done the same for you. And Ron actually won an international award for this project. And it's really the top award when it comes to architecture. So Ron, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask if you would to please speak to this recent project for which you received this really impressive award.
Thank you, Carla. Yeah, so my studio, Rael Sanfratello, which I share with Virginia Sanfratello, and an artist collective, Colectivo Chopeque, whom we collaborated with in Juarez, received one of the premier awards of design in the world. And this was a project that was 10 years in the making. And it's really a very humble project. It was just the design of a small playground, even just one piece of playground equipment, a teeter-totter that we installed on the wall that divides the US from Mexico so that families on both sides can be connected. And while this was just a humble event with just a small community, it seemed to have attracted the attention of the world. And I think because everyone can relate to the generosity of the teeter-totter, the fact that when you're on a teeter-totter, one's enjoyment is entirely related to the generosity of the person on the other side, and how ridiculous it is to build walls that separate our innate generosity that we have as human beings for others.
I think that's beautifully stated. I encourage everyone after this program, if you haven't seen this particular project, go ahead and Google Ron's name and teeter-totter or seesaw, however you might describe it, and look at this beautiful project. It was bright pink, and it really encapsulated how, these are children on both sides of the border, and he really brought it home in a way that, to quote Sister Irene, it lives in your heart. His art truly lives in your heart. I want to move now to the fact that Ron is now, as I mentioned, working with Little Piece of Home. And this initiative is so compelling. What was your inspiration for what you specifically brought to this project? And what were you hoping to do at the shelters, Ron?
Sure. Well, the inspiration for the project comes from my own background. I come from a part of the United States that used to be the border between the United States and Mexico, and we have a tradition of cooking in hornos. I would say that the larger community, and I only learned recently that my great grandmother was an avid cook on an horno, and I didn't realize that. But I also know how she brought together communities around her food and cooking with this very simple cooking technology made out of mud, and so that was the inspiration. And I guess what I'm hoping to accomplish at these migrant shelters is that I'm simply hoping to participate in projects that improve the lives of shelter residents by using the tool of design. And you might ask, what is design? For me, design is solving problems. But solving problems by making something with elegance and craft and beauty and humanity. And I'm hoping that the communities in the shelters, and the Light, and the team of creative people, and myself can work to design better spaces of empowerment that give confidence and as Sister Irene was saying, that celebrate their own talents and skills and empower them to make the place that they currently reside better for them. And also for those who follow them as well, because they are on the move, and they too can leave a legacy in these places that empower others.
You were on the ground, as we saw in the video and in the movie that was just beautiful, and truly working with the folks there at the shelter to build this Orno. What was that experience like? Did the project turn out as you had hoped, as you had expected? And what are you hearing now from those who helped you build it?
Sure. You know, I didn't know exactly what to expect. And I remember when I arrived, there was a lot of complications in the arrival. There's a little backstory that many of the people who were coming from Alight could not come into the shelter because of COVID, and so it was myself and a one filmmaker in the beginning, and so this was a little bit unexpected. And so we arrived and we introduced ourselves. And the first thing I asked everyone is if they had some connection to making hornos or cooking on hornos, and most of the people, most of the adults at least, raised their hand and said yeah. And so that also gave me confidence that I sort of wasn't in this alone, that we all had some connection to this. And that was my, you know, if my aspiration was to make a connection around this oven, there was already a connection that everyone shared around the oven. And so that was really, that, I don't know, that brought me a lot of comfort and also excitement, but also it was a moment that we were sharing stories about what it meant to make an horno in Colorado versus in Guatemala, for example. And those were beautiful moments of bringing that community together, of the horno makers, for example. You know, like Sister Irene was saying, I think many migrants arrive to places afraid. And I think that the making of this horno empowered them to leave behind some fears and to recognize that they have the capacity to build upon their own cooking tradition. So some of the things that I've seen and heard is that not only did they finish the horno and plaster it beautifully after we left, but they started making small mud stoves for cooking tortillas, for example, and other cooking platforms and tables. And so they did this on their own initiative to kind of reinforce their own cooking traditions as well. And so I've kept in touch, especially with one of the members there at the community, talking about the horno and what he's cooking. And sometimes if it's cold, he's out there making bread by the warmth of the fire. And so that's really beautiful that we have created a real friendship.
Really beautiful indeed. We're so grateful for that project and that it's ongoing. I want to shift back to Sister Irene. Sister Irene, this horno project has been amazing, but it's truly one part of the transformation at the shelter in Nogales. And I want to give you an opportunity to just really speak to what else has happened there that you've been part of that has contributed to that really addressing, directing, helping, lifting up the whole person.
There's been a lot of wonderful things happening there. They did transform a space for children at the shelter with play equipment. So there's sports and school supplies and toys and colorful things and homey spaces where the children can just snuggle into places and go into their imaginations like the rest of us did when we were children. Also, there's a big stock of crafts for knitting and needlework and a place for the adults to decompress and to meditate. Like I said, they need to get away so that they can think. So some of those spaces were built as well. And I love this, they did a garden space. And so they're able to raise food and they all know how to garden. And that's, you know, they connect with the earth again and connect with normalcy. So we really wanted the whole space to be so that people they could recognize their own humanity. So it was good. Nope, got a dog out in the back.
I'm guessing it's a squirrel. The dog sees a squirrel, and squirrels are also universal, right? We see squirrels in most every country. Well, that is really amazing, all of those parts of the transformation. I know that there have been a lot of partners, organizations, individuals to help make this happen, to really bring this off the ground and into reality. And Sister Irene, could you speak a little bit to who those individuals, those organizations are and what they might have contributed to make this a reality?
Wait, there's so many organizations, but the ones that are the big stand, and let me just say why first, because, you know, migration is a global issue and there's millions of people migrating all the time. And so in this particular place, Alight is a organization that has a global perspective. They see this movement, they know how big it is, and they know the complexity. And what's fabulous about Alight is that they invite other people in who understand the big picture, and they bring in their own people who've been supporting Alight as well. But some of the other partnerships that they brought in were like IDEO, the Global Shapers, the Burner Man. I mean, and I have to say, they bring in talent, not just regular talent like some of us, but people like Ron, you know, who have a global vision on also and art, using his art for creating peace. So anyway, those are some that just come to the top, but there's so many people, but it helps to have that global perspective. And Alight is just phenomenal. They're just a phenomenal organization. So they get it. They just get it.
And I would say, Sister Irene, I think that their feeling is mutual. I think they consider you phenomenal as well. But I mean, to your point, there's no question this is a complex problem, and Alight and yourself and others have all recognized that it's not going to just be one organization that addresses it. It has to be a combined cooperative approach. Ron, I just want to go back to you just briefly. We had this vision of this particular shelter. What's your vision now after this shelter, and what are your plans in terms of what you're hoping to do next?
I keep forgetting to press unmute. The plans are, I mean, I think there's a larger vision here for shelters all across the border and maybe even across several countries, that we would continue to build hornos, continue to improve spaces for children, for gardens, for schools, for different populations of migrants. And so our plans in the next several months are to build more of these and bring more people together along the border.
That is fabulous. How can people who are listening now, or maybe others who hear about it later, how can others be a part of it?
Sure. Well, I think the best way is to pick up the phone and call Alight right now, or get in touch with them, or send them an email, or go to the website, worldwideweb.pedacitodelatierra.org, and get in touch. And I think that there hopefully will be some other opportunities to think about how we can involve people more closely and intimately in the process as well. But getting in touch with Alight, I think, is the best way to move forward and keep this project going.
I love that. And for others whose Spanish may not be as good as Ron's, I believe Alyssa just provided some links. So we have that information available to you too on how you can connect with Alight. So we are so grateful to Ron and Sister Irene. We know you have been asking some questions. So I want to go ahead and ask some of the questions that you have contributed in the chat, and please continue to do so. We'll try to get to a few of them right now. So first question, how do people get to this shelter versus other shelters? Are they referred to it by the US government, or is there some other avenue that is specifically bringing them to that location? And either of you can take that question.
I can take a try at that. Again, there's so many migrants along the trail. They're coming from many different countries, and all along the way, they're finding help. I mean, if you go to any little village, there's a little group of sisters there kind of waiting. Go to another village, you got some others. But they talk to each other. So they're passing information along among themselves. And sometimes a border place will close, or sometimes another place will be too full, or so they're trying to help each other is how they really do it. And it depends. Sometimes if I mean, the last couple of years has been kind of different up on the border. And so nobody really knew what to expect. And they would go from one shelter to another if there wasn't space. And COVID, of course, played a big thing. I don't know. It's not a pretty picture on how they get the answers, but they try to help each other.
Yeah, no question. And it's important that that communication happens. All right, next question. How many people reside at that particular shelter in Nogales? And what is the length of stay typically? And that might be different, as Sister Irene just mentioned, because of the COVID situation. But I'll let you go ahead with that, either Sister Irene or Ron.
I can also help out here too, if it's helpful to Irene and Ron. I'm going to jump in. I work for Alight. My name is Annie Multi-Henning. I'm the Director of Americas. So I can help answer some of the questions specifically about some of the context there, though Ron has been there most recently. At this particular shelter in Nogales right now, there's a little over 200 residents made up of families, children, and unaccompanied minors. And I think that the second part of the question was length of stay. The COVID situation has compounded the challenges here. A lot of times the length of stay can be anywhere from a few weeks to just a few months. With COVID, many of the residents that are currently in Nogales have just been there past the 1 year mark, and will continue to reside there until they know more about their next move. So the length of stay in many of these migrant shelters right now are running much, much longer because of the COVID situation.
Not too surprising. Annie, thank you so much for weighing in. I want to go ahead and Ron, maybe you have something to add to this, and please feel free to do so. I'll just throw out this question as well, and both of you can tackle it. But specifically regarding the funding, does the funding for the shelter come from Alight? Anything from the church? Are the sisters supported? And then Ron, feel free to tack on to what Annie just said, but then Annie, if you wanted to handle the funding question, however you want to shake that out.
Sure, I'll answer some of it and then pass over to Ron. So the shelter in Nogales is funded by an intercongregational group out of Southern Arizona that's made up of Catholics and the Episcopalians and Methodists. And so they do the core funding of that, of Casa de la Misericordia for Sister Lica's shelter. The Pedacito de la Tierra project that you all just saw a video of was supported by Alight and a collaboration of many other partners and donors. There's a lot of Catholic foundations that support the Catholic sisters there. As far as I can't speak to specifically to how the Catholic Church supports the sisters in this particular shelter, but it is it is kind of an all hands on deck collaboration to make sure that the lights stay on and that there's enough beds for all of the residents that are arriving. I'll pass it over to Ron.
Yeah, I was just going to add about the stats of who are there, some surprising things that I learned when I was working there, which is that of those 200 residents, and correct me if I'm wrong, Annie, of those 200 residents, half of them are children. And people have lived there so long now because of COVID and because of the politics of the border, that children have actually been given birth, been born there. Their children have been given birth, children have been born there. And so you can see that this particular shelter is really become a long-term community with children growing up in the shelter right now.
Thank you for providing that insight too, Ron, because that is so important to think about that and what it means to every age and every family. Ron, I want to continue with you, if you will. The advice that you might give young architecture designers who have lots of student debt, we all understand that, but they want to be involved in projects like this. They probably are very inspired by your work. What are some options perhaps available to people who want to do something and are, trying to strike that balance right now?
That's nice. It's always a tough question. My advice, and full disclosure, I still owe my entire student debt because of interest. I mean, I owe a lot of money, so you can't allow that to be a barrier in your lives. and you have to do the things that you want to do. And if you want to contribute to the betterment of society, you have to see that that debt that you took on is an investment in yourself. That maybe you took out loans or whatever, but that's an investment that you took on yourself, and you can't waste that investment on simply trying to pay it back, but to do something else.
Thank you. That's great. And full disclosure, I owe some graduate school loans still too. So there you go. We probably could all have some confessionals right here. Specifically regarding COVID, and this gets to policy. So whoever feels comfortable answering this question, I can probably even provide some insight, but Annie, I'm guessing might have a handle on this, but with COVID, is the asylum process totally on pause?
Good question, and it'll probably change by the time I'm done answering this question. So as of just, in the last few weeks, the borders have been closed for almost a year now because of COVID. And whether it was because of COVID or other policy related matters, all asylum processes were indefinitely paused last year around this time. So for almost a year, when we say that people are stuck at the border, they actually are stuck with no cases resuming. Now, just over the past week or two, there's been new policies where asylum cases are restarting, albeit very slowly. And the storm in in Texas and the southern states have really slowed that down as well. But we are hopeful that the asylum processes will restart, but just imagine how many, I think that there were 60,000 people that were stuck at the border at the beginning of COVID last year. That's not others that have since traveled. There's a lot of families that are now traveling, hearing that there is a chance for the borders opening soon. So are finally deciding to make that journey. And so it's going to be, almost think of it as like the vaccine rollout. It's not going to be all at once. And there's a lot of people who have not even started the process. So they're going to be starting very, very soon with the couple thousand that were already somewhere, stuck in the process. So we have high hopes that that the process will resume, but it's not going to be able to address the amount of people in a really big way for quite some time. I don't know if Carla, Irene, Ron, you have anything to add to that?
I think that was comprehensive. I thought that was great. Thank you. And obviously all of us would be available for further comment afterward if anyone wants further clarification, but that was great. Thank you, Annie. This is another question for Ron. Why do you think building with earth has been looked down upon? And how could getting back to earth construction benefit the earth and humanity? That's a really interesting question, Ron.
Oh, yeah, that is a good question. And it is a question that people have contended with for a long time, that building with earth is often seen as the building material of the poor. But in fact, there are embassies and airports and museums made out of adobe around the world. And so it's not only in rural places, but it's in urban places. But there is this preconception that it's only a building material for the poor and it doesn't last very long. But in fact, the oldest buildings on the planet are made out of earth. So it's really, I think, it requires some education, but also I think we're in this moment of enlightenment about our planet's ecology and about our indigeneity, that we can celebrate those building traditions that have served humanity for 10,000 years, and we can allow them to continue.
So great. I just want to thank both Sister Irene and Ron for your time today, but also your talent and your commitment and your dedication to people all along the border, but really to our greater community, because we're all so connected. And we're so grateful that you have brought your talents to this project and that you've joined up with Alight. So thank you to each of you for what you are doing with Little Piece of Home. And really this project at Nogales, this shelter is just the beginning for Alight. The Little Piece of Home initiative will continue. They already have plans specifically to go to 2 more migrant shelters in Tijuana, one of which addresses and really reaches out to migrants who happen to be in the LGBTQI community. And we know that those migrants are particularly vulnerable to truly violence and discrimination and other issues that are really unimaginable. And when you consider that migrants are already experiencing just peril and challenge every single day of their lives. So we are grateful that Alight has that in their plans as well. So, you know, I think also in terms of Alight's future plans, they're looking to work with shelters providing families with sanctuary all along the border. So typical of Alight, they are seeing the problem. They are seeing that it doesn't exist just at one place, one location, but they're looking throughout the region and looking where else they can bring this really collective and coordinated effort to do what we can and do what they can to help assist in a crisis. And at that moment, I just would just say, I think that, you know, you pause and you can get overwhelmed by this crisis. I think a lot of us at home, and especially after this last year, we can get overwhelmed by everything that happens, everything we read about, everything we even hear about. And when we see these glimmers of hope and of action and opportunity to help and to directly assist, I think it's an opportunity that we should seize upon. And it is something that gives us as much as we can give back. So, and with that, I just want to encourage all of you, if you feel so moved, if you feel so inclined, to consider supporting Little Piece of Home. There is several ways that you can do it. And specifically, there is a little scanner, I believe, on your screen that will allow you to directly contribute to Alight. And then that will just make it really easy and schmeezy. And you can do it just so, you know, any amount truly can make a difference to all of this effort. It's so impressive what people are doing there. And this is a simple way that we all can support it. And I know that that can be really affirming for each of us. You can also visit the website that you see right there. And just to really and truly emphasize that any amount can make a difference. And again, just going back to how I feel sitting here in Minneapolis and the upstairs, I have a daughter at home because it haven't been able to get her back to school yet. Sometimes it just feels frustrating. You know, what can I possibly do? Well, we can do this. We can support people like Sister Irene, like Ron, and what they're doing specifically on the ground. And of course, we can always support Alight because they have their finger on the pulse of the best way to make a difference. So I would encourage all of you to consider doing that. And I also would welcome if anyone had any additional questions, whether it's to me, to Sister Irene, or to Ron, to continue to reach out to all of us. And of course, Annie as well, all of the folks at Alight who can really answer the questions that you might have regarding these projects, regarding the crisis, and regarding what you personally can do about it. So thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to connect. It was awesome to see everyone and to even read those names. And I just thank you so much for all you are doing just by simply participating in this conversation. You are doing a lot. So thank you again. And I'm going to turn it back now to Jeremy.
Carla, thank you so much for moderating that really, really interesting and wonderful discussion. We're really fortunate to have had you here today. And of course, a huge thanks again to Sister Irene and Ron as well for everything that you're doing, actually, the work on the border. We also, again, want to thank everyone for joining us today, for being a part of this conversation. Just a quick reminder that Alight's Workshare series continues next week at the same time. And we were so fortunate to have Carla here this week. Next week, we're going to be joined by another really amazing journalist from DevEx named Sarah Jerving. And she recently returned from the Sudan, Ethiopia area. And we're going to be shining a light on some work that we're doing there regarding the most recent conflict in Ethiopia. So again, a thank you again to everybody, Carla, Sister Irene, Ron, and everyone for being here today. And we hope to see many of you next week.